The ammonia scent of the cleaner was sharp in my nostrils, a familiar burn that meant the end of a long shift. My mop handle, worn smooth from 1,000 nights just like this one, glided across the black marble floor. Squeak, glide, dip. Squeak, glide, dip. It was a rhythm that let my mind drift, usually to my daughter, Lily, sleeping soundly at my mom's apartment. It was a rhythm that paid the rent. The offices of Moretti Holdings were always the last job of the night, a silent tower of glass and steel overlooking a city that never slept. I was the only one here, or so I thought. I rounded the corner of the immense executive suite, my rubber-soled shoes silent on the polished stone. And then I saw him. Dante Moretti, the man whose name was spoken in whispers in boardrooms and back alleys. He stood with his back to the city, one hand braced against the floor-to-ceiling window, the other pressed hard against his mouth. His shoulders, usually ramrod straight beneath a suit that cost more than my car, were shaking. A sound, low and strangled, tore from his throat. It was the sound of a man being ripped apart from the inside. I had seen him maybe 3 times before, a passing shadow of immense power, his presence so heavy it felt like it sucked the air from the room. I had seen him dismiss men twice his size with a flick of his wrist. I had never seen him look anything less than carved from granite. But now he was crying. Not just crying. He was broken. My mop clattered against the floor. The sound was a gunshot in the crushing silence. His head snapped up. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, found me in the dim light. The grief vanished, replaced instantly by something cold and lethal. The air crackled. He was a predator who had just been seen at his most vulnerable, and I was the creature that had stumbled into the wrong part of the forest. I knew in that second that my simple, predictable life was over. I thought my biggest problem was making rent. However, my biggest problem was now the man in front of me, whose single word could erase my existence. And he knew that I had seen everything. He pushed off the window, his movements unervingly smooth. The broken man was gone. In his place was the Dante Moretti of legend. His face was a mask of cold fury, his jaw tight. "What did you see?" His voice was low, a gravelly rasp that vibrated through the marble floor. My throat was dust. Nothing. I saw nothing. I was just finishing up. My own voice sounded thin, pathetic. My hands, still damp from the mop water, trembled. I curled them into fists behind my back, hiding the weakness.
He stopped a few feet from me.
He was taller than I'd realized, casting a long shadow that swallowed me whole. He smelled of expensive cologne, something with sandalwood and the faint, metallic tang of gunpowder. "You are the cleaner," it was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a label that defined me as insignificant.
Yes.
Clara, I don't know why I gave him my name. An instinct to be a person, not just a function. He took another step. The space between us shrank until I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the dark stubble shadowing his jaw. "Clara," he repeated, and the way he said it was different. It wasn't my name. It was a specimen under a microscope. People who see things they shouldn't in this building have a habit of disappearing. The threat was so blunt, so devoid of emotion. It was more terrifying than any shout. My mind raced, not with fear for myself, but with a searing, white-hot panic for Lily. If I disappeared, what would happen to her? My mom was getting older. She couldn't raise another child. "I have a daughter," I blurted out. The words were a shield, the only one I had. "She's 6. She's waiting for me." His expression didn't change, but something flickered deep in his eyes. A flash of that same pain I'd seen moments before. It was there, and gone in a heartbeat. "A daughter," he said, the words flat. He looked past me, at my discarded mop and bucket, the tools of my invisible trade. "You will not be going home tonight." That was the moment the floor truly fell away. It was not a negotiation. It was a decree. He turned and walked to his desk, a massive slab of dark wood. He pressed a button on an intercom.
"Marco.
Come to my office. We have a guest." A man built like a refrigerator, with a shaved head and a broken nose, appeared in the doorway almost instantly. He looked at me, then at his boss, his face impassive. She stays, Dante said, not looking at me. He was already staring at a stack of papers on his desk, his focus absolute, as if I were no longer in the room. Put her in the suite on the 3rd floor. Take her phone. See that she has what she needs. She does not leave. Marco nodded once. He gestured for me to walk ahead of him. My legs felt like they were filled with wet cement. I took one last look at Dante Moretti. He hadn't moved. He was the king on his throne, rearranging the pieces of his world. And I was now one of them. I thought I was just mopping a floor. But I had walked into a king's morning chamber, and in doing so, I had become a prisoner. The door to my old life didn't just close. He had locked it and thrown away the key. The suite on the 3rd floor was more luxurious than any place I had ever been in my life. It was all cream leather and dark wood, with a view that stretched all the way to the harbor. It was also a cage. Marco had been polite but firm. He'd taken my phone, promising to call my mother and tell her I'd been asked to work a double shift. A plausible lie that made my stomach clench with fear. For 2 days, I existed in that suite. Food appeared outside my door on a silent cart. I showered in a bathroom bigger than my living room. I paced. I watched the city lights flicker to life and die again. I thought about Lily. I thought about the raw, unfiltered grief on Dante Moretti's face. What could break a man like that? On the 3rd night, the door opened. It was him. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple black sweater and dark trousers. He looked tired. The mask was back in place, but I could see the cracks around the edges. He held a small, framed photograph in his hand. He didn't speak for a long time. He just walked to the window, the same way he had in his office. He looked out at the city that was his kingdom. "My son," he said, his voice quiet. His name was Matteo. He would have been 6 this year. My breath caught in my chest. 6. The same age as Lily. He turned the frame so I could see it. A beautiful boy with dark, curly hair and his father's serious eyes, sitting on the lap of a woman with a radiant smile. And my wife, Isabella. What happened? The question was out before I could stop it. His gaze snapped to mine, cold and hard. "You ask a lot of questions for a cleaner. You're the one holding me prisoner." I shot back, a surge of anger cutting through the fear. "I think that buys me a question." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He seemed unused to being challenged. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. Then he looked back at the photograph. "A rival," he said, his voice flat and dead. "Silvio Gallo. He wanted my territory. He thought taking them would break me, make me weak." He paused, his knuckles white where he gripped the frame. He was wrong. It made me empty. And an empty man has nothing left to lose. That was the source of the grief. Not a business deal gone wrong. A world, an entire family, annihilated. He had lost everything that mattered. And I had stumbled upon the precise moment that truth had crashed down on him. He put the photograph down on a table, handling it with a reverence that was almost painful to watch. "Gallo's people are watching this building. They are watching everyone who comes and goes. If I let you walk out that door, they will follow you. They will get to you. And they will use you to get to me." He finally looked at me, his eyes dark with a terrible certainty. "They will go after your daughter." The blood drained from my face. Lily. The thought of anyone hurting her, using her, it was unimaginable. "So you are safer here," he concluded. "Under my protection." "This isn't protection," I said, my voice shaking. "This is a cage." "Cages keep things safe," he replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. "I cannot trust anyone. My organization is bleeding. There are rats everywhere. Betrayal is what killed my wife and son." Someone on the inside gave Gallo the location of my country house. He ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion suddenly stark. "But you are nothing. A cleaner. No one knows you. No one would suspect you." His words were a strange mix of insult and opportunity. I was nothing, and therefore, I was useful. He was thinking, calculating. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. "I don't want any part of this," I said, my voice low. "You have no choice," he said. Not anymore. The next week was a blur of tense proximity. He moved me from the suite to a small, functional apartment on a higher floor of the same building. He even arranged for my mother and Lily to be moved into a similar apartment one floor below mine, under the guise of a sudden inheritance that allowed me to provide for them. My mother, bless her, asked few questions, just happy that we were safe and together. Lily was thrilled with her new, big bedroom. She didn't see the bars on her window, but I did. They were invisible, but they were there. Dante didn't trust his own staff to be in his private penthouse, so I became its sole cleaner. Every day, I would go up to his sanctuary, a sprawling space of minimalist design and aching emptiness. I would clean floors that were already spotless, dust surfaces that held no dust. And I would watch him. He worked relentlessly, a man possessed. He ate at his desk, slept for a few hours on the couch. He was waging a war from that penthouse, a quiet, surgical war of finance and information, cutting off his rivals' resources one by one. Sometimes, he would forget I was there. He would speak in low, urgent tones on the phone, his words painting a picture of a brutal, unforgiving world. I learned the names of his capos, the territories under dispute, the scent of his enemies' fear. I learned that Dante Moretti was methodical, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. One evening, I was polishing a glass table in his living area. He was at his desk, a stack of ledgers in front of him. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the street below, followed by another. A car alarm began to shriek. Dante moved faster than I thought possible. In a single fluid motion, he was across the room, grabbing my arm and pulling me down behind the heavy marble desk. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl. His body was a shield over mine, the scent of sandalwood and something else, something purely him, surrounding me. His other hand held a sleek, black handgun that had appeared from nowhere. The room was plunged into darkness as he hit a switch on the underside of the desk. The only light came from the city glow filtering through the bulletproof windows. My heart hammered against my ribs, but it wasn't just fear. It was the shocking, undeniable reality of his body pressed against mine, the solid weight of him, the warmth radiating through his sweater.
He was protecting me.
"What was that?" I whispered, my voice tight. "Gallo is getting impatient," he murmured, his breath stirring the hair at my temple. His eyes were fixed on the windows, scanning the street below. A message. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, crouched in the dark. The city sounds slowly returned to normal. The car alarm was silenced. My breathing began to even out. I became aware of my hand, which was pressed flat against his chest. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart under my palm. It was calm, so utterly calm. He moved through this violence like it was his natural element. He finally shifted, moving back slightly, though he didn't get up. He looked down at me, his face inches from mine. In the dim light, his eyes were deep pools of shadow.
He saw my hand on his chest.
I snatched it back as if burned. He didn't comment on it. Instead, his gaze held mine. "You didn't scream," he said, a note of something I couldn't identify in his voice. "You didn't panic. It wouldn't have helped," I said simply. A long silence stretched between us. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of our breathing, the low hum of the city, and 1,000 unspoken things. He was seeing me, I realized, not as the cleaner, not as a liability, but as someone who had faced down terror and remained still. He said my name then, just a whisper in the dark. Clara. It was different this time. It held a weight, a texture. It was the sound of a man who had been alone for a very long time, finding an unexpected anchor in a storm. In that moment, I could have pushed him away, run to the other side of the room. I had every reason to, but I didn't. I stayed right where I was, held in place by his intense gaze. That stillness, that choice to not run, was a confession. I was no longer just his prisoner. Something else was taking root in the darkness between us, something dangerous and undeniable. Because I had helped him, because I had stayed, he had brought me deeper into his world. Therefore, my fate and my daughter's fate were now inextricably tied to his survival. The cage had just gotten a lot bigger, and I was no longer sure I wanted to find the door. Life settled into a new, terrifying rhythm. I was Dante's shadow, the silent keeper of his sanctuary. I saw the cost of his war. I saw him come back late at night, his knuckles bruised, a haunted look in his eyes that spoke of things I was glad I didn't have to witness. One night, he stumbled in, a dark stain spreading across the side of his white shirt. "Get Marco," he grunted, slumping against the wall. But Marco was downstairs, guarding Lily and my mother. His entire trusted inner circle was stretched thin. "They're on the lower levels," I said, my professional calm taking over. "Let me see." He tried to wave me off, but he was losing blood too quickly. I ignored him, my hands moving with a competence born of necessity. I tore his shirt open. It was a deep gash on his side, bleeding sluggishly. Not a bullet, but a knife wound. "Sit," I ordered, my voice firm. To my surprise, he did, sinking onto one of the low leather couches. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing a clean dish towel and the bottle of expensive vodka I knew he kept in the freezer. I returned and knelt before him. "This is going to hurt," I said, pouring the alcohol directly onto the wound. He hissed, his body tensing, but he didn't make another sound. He just watched me, his eyes dark and intense, as I pressed the cloth hard against the gash. My hands were steady. I focused on the task, on the pressure, on the weave of the fabric against his skin. I refused to think about the fact that I was tending to a wound given to the most dangerous man in New York by an even more dangerous one. I refused to think about how close he was, the heat of his skin, the scent of blood and sandalwood. He reached out and caught my wrist. His grip was surprisingly gentle. "Look at me," he commanded. I lifted my eyes from his side to his face. The cold mask was gone. In its place was a raw vulnerability that mirrored what I'd seen that first night in his office. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why are you doing this? You could have let me bleed." "If you die," I said, my voice as steady as my hands, "Gallo wins. And I don't know what he'll do to my daughter. Your survival is my survival." It was the brutal truth. Practical. Unsentimental. But his eyes searched mine for something more. And maybe if I were being honest with myself, it was there. I hadn't just done it for Lily. I had done it for him. This broken, lethal man who was fighting a war for the ghosts of his family. He let go of my wrist, but his gaze never left my face. The silence in the room was a living thing. The city lights cast long shadows on the floor. In that moment, the ground between us shifted permanently. I was no longer just his cleaner or his prisoner. I was his confidant, his medic, the only person who saw the man behind the monster. His war with Gallo escalated. Dante was winning, but it was a war of attrition. He needed an edge. He needed to know Gallo's next move. He had intelligence that Gallo kept a private ledger, a record of every bribe, every dirty cop, every politician in his pocket. It was his insurance policy. And it was kept in the office of a law firm he used as a front. A place Dante's men could never get into without starting a bloodbath. "They clean the offices at night," he said one evening, watching me as I wiped down his kitchen counters. "A commercial crew." I stopped, my hand freezing on the cold granite. I knew what he was asking without him saying a word. "They're always hiring," he continued, his voice casual, but his eyes were like steel. "A woman with your experience would have no trouble getting a job there. One shift. That's all I need." To get this, he slid a small, flat device across the counter toward me. A listening bug. My blood ran cold. This was different. This wasn't just being a witness. This was participating. This was a crime. A line I had never imagined crossing. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't." "Clara," he said, and my name was a soft, dangerous caress. He came to stand in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him.
"He knows about you."
"He knows I've kept you here. He thinks you're my weakness." My heart stopped. What? One of my men saw Gallows people watching your mother take Lily to the park yesterday. They didn't do anything. They were just watching. Sending a message. A wave of nausea washed over me. Lily. My bright, happy, innocent Lily. A pawn in their monstrous game. The rage that filled me was so potent it tasted like metal. It burned away the fear, the hesitation. It burned away the woman I used to be. I looked from the bug to his unyielding face. Tell me what I have to do, I said, my voice hard and clear. Crossing that line was easier than I thought. A week later, wearing a different cleaning uniform, I was pushing a trash can through the hushed, empty offices of Gallows attorneys. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. I found his private office, a gaudy room filled with dark, heavy furniture. Planting the bug under his desk was the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. I got out without anyone noticing. I was just a cleaner. Invisible. When I returned to the penthouse, Dante was waiting. I handed him the small receiver that paired with the bug. I didn't say a word. I just watched his face as he put an earbud in and listened. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile. It was not a pleasant sight. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its prey. He's meeting his key people tomorrow night, Dante said, pulling the earbud out. At a warehouse on the docks. He's telling them he's making his final move against me. He looked at me, and the smile was gone, replaced by that familiar intensity. You did well, Clara. I did it for my daughter, I said, the words a familiar shield. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cut my jaw. His thumb brushed against my skin, a touch so gentle it was startling. I know, he said, his voice low. But you did it for me, too. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And it was true. I couldn't deny it. Not to him. Not to myself. The confession hung in the air between us. It wasn't about love. It was about loyalty. An oath sworn in fear and sealed in crime. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. No one will ever touch you or your daughter again, he whispered. I swear it on my son's grave. It was the most sacred vow he could make. A claim. But as I stood there, his hand on my face, a terrible thought occurred to me. I had helped him, I had crossed a line, and now he had what he needed to end this war. I thought this would be the end of the danger. But I had just made myself the most valuable asset in his war, and the most obvious target for his enemy. The next night was the longest of my life. Dante and his men were gone, moving on the warehouse Gallo was using for his meeting. I was left in the penthouse with Marco standing guard outside the door. I paced the length of the vast apartment, my mind a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. Every siren in the distance made me jump. I was inextricably tied to him now. If his plan failed, if Gallo won, I knew what would happen to me and Lily. There would be no mercy. Hours crawled by. The sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. Then I heard the elevator. The doors to the penthouse slid open. Dante stood there. He was covered in grime and blood, some of it his, some of it not. His suit was torn, his face was bruised, but he was standing. He walked into the room, his steps heavy with exhaustion. The finality of the night hung around him like a shroud. It's over, he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. Gallo is gone. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees went weak. I had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. Over. The word was a prayer answered. He crossed the room and stopped in front of me. He looked down at his hands, then slowly, deliberately, he went into the bathroom and washed them, scrubbing away the evidence of the night's violence. When he came out, he seemed to have shed the weight of his war. The haunted look was still there, but it was fainter, like a ghost that was finally beginning to fade. He had a file on you, Dante said quietly. On you and Lily. A contingency plan. He knew you were the one who planted the bug. My blood ran cold.
How?
The same way he killed my family, Dante said, his voice hard as iron. A rat in my house. I dealt with him tonight, too. The sheer, brutal efficiency of his world was breathtaking. He had dismantled his enemy and purged his own ranks in a single night of calculated violence. And I had given him the key. I was no longer an innocent bystander. I was an accomplice. The old Clara, the woman who just wanted to mop floors and raise her daughter, was gone forever. I had made a choice, a morally gray decision, and this was the consequence. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the first rays of the morning sun. He handed one to me. My hand trembled as I took it. "You are free to go," he said, watching my face. "You and your family. I have arranged it. A new life, anywhere you want. A new name, enough money that you will never have to work again. No one will ever find you. I will keep you safe from a distance." It was everything I should have wanted. An escape. A clean slate. A way back to a normal life for Lily. It was a door, wide open, leading back into the light. I should have run through it without a second thought. But I looked at him. This man who had lost everything and fought his way back from the abyss. This man who had shown me his deepest wound and trusted me when he trusted no one else. This man whose survival had become tangled up with my own. Leaving him felt like a betrayal. It felt like leaving a part of myself behind in the darkness of this penthouse. He saw the hesitation in my eyes. "What is it you want, Clara?" he asked, his voice soft. I thought of my small, cramped apartment, the smell of bleach, the constant worry about bills. A simple life. A safe life. But was it? The world was dangerous everywhere. There were monsters far worse than Dante Moretti who didn't wear expensive suits. At least with him. I knew the name of the monster. I had seen his humanity. I had touched his heart, felt it beat steadily under my palm in the face of death. I set the untouched whiskey glass down on the table. I walked to the window and looked out at the city spread below us. His city. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A new day. I didn't have to say anything. I just had to choose. I could walk out the door and disappear, or I could stay and face this new, complicated reality. He came to stand beside me, our shoulders almost touching. The silence stretched, comfortable, certain. He wasn't pressuring me. He was giving me the one thing no one else ever had, a real choice. I thought of Lily, sleeping peacefully in her new, safe bed. I thought of the future. The life he offered was an illusion of safety. The life here, it was dangerous, yes, but it was real. And in it, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I had not been a passive victim. I had acted. I had survived. I had made a difference. I turned my head and looked at him. The morning light softened the hard lines of his face. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, and this time, it reached his eyes. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. It was a beginning. I didn't answer his question with words. I didn't need to. I simply reached out and placed my hand on his arm. A simple touch. A silent promise. The choice was made. My old life was gone, paid for in blood and secrets. But as the sun climbed higher over the city, I realized I wasn't mourning its loss. I was simply facing the dawn.